is happening to me constantly. I can always access the divine, and I have various ways to do that. I started to learn how my body was talking to me. I understood that that was the place where all of the magic happens. That's where I met God. Yoga will tell you that you can learn a lot from the body, but it is a temporary thing.
Angie, thanks for being with us today.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat with you today.
Let me start with a kind of a general question. I know this isn't exactly the topic that we're going to talk about today, but as you meet new people, generally, what are they surprised to find out about you?
Okay, this is a funny one.
Okay.
And I'd be curious to know your answer as well, because I generally receive that if I had a nickel for every single time I receive that I look really intense or really um, scary or stony, those are all things
Really?
that I receive very often, very often. I'd have a
Really?
lot of nickels.
Okay.
But so kind of alongside that is like, oh, you're a lot nicer than you look. Something to that effect is pretty common for me.
Is that right? Okay. Has that been all your life or more just adulthood or?
I think it's just my face. I don't know. I don't mean to. I think that I also don't use my forehead a whole lot. And so I think that because I don't use my forehead a lot, um, most of my expression happens from my eyes down. And so I
Yeah.
think that perhaps that has something to do with it. And I don't mean to, like I can move my eyebrows.
So you have to go around saying, I'm not mean. I'm not mean.
Yeah, well, I'm used to it at this point. I just kind of go, okay, well, it's not, I don't mean to, it's just my face.
So what you're saying is what people are generally surprised by is that you're a nice person.
Yeah. I'm less abrasive, I guess, than I look, but
Okay.
I don't
I
know.
don't think you look abrasive, but
Well,
you
thank you.
definitely have an intensity to your eyes. I would go along with that part.
Uh-huh. Thank you so much. Well, now I just take it and I go, all right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Not going to do anything about it.
No, I mean, I couldn't even if I wanted to,
Yeah,
I'm just
exactly.
standing there.
Exactly.
So yeah.
That's good. Um, and if you were saying, if you'd asked me the same thing, it's kind of interesting because I think that mine would be similar to that. Not so
Hmm.
much maybe about my look, but my mannerism. I'm sure, pretty dry and serious. And so
I
people are
mean,
surprised that I not totally that way.
I think it's unfair because I also know your wife. And so I think I knew a little bit about you prior to my meeting you.
Yes.
But I do definitely think that for me, you definitely seem like a studious person, like you're
Mm,
really curious.
right.
That's what maybe my impression was of you.
Okay. Well, that's pretty accurate. I
All right,
think.
right on.
I think. So let's get right into it. The topic today, yoga. And that's how
Yeah,
my wife is your teacher at times with my wife taking yoga. So
that's right. She's a good egg.
what got you into yoga? Let's just start there.
It was kind of a step. So at the time I was a new mom and I had just started teaching fitness, and so for me that was kind of purely accidental. I was looking to reconnect with my body after having my baby, and my sister was in the same, she hadn't had a baby, but she was endeavoring to also connect with her body. And so we went to a Zumba class. I think we stayed all of like 15 or 20 minutes. We were so out of shape, but we had a
Mm,
blast. So that kind of began our um, embodiment journey, let's say. And then from there, I began going to a yoga class, which I had wanted to try. If I had to say, in reality, what I really wanted was to get more flexible. It
mm,
wasn't really about spirituality for me at first. It was more that like I really wanted an avenue to stretch myself, so to speak. And then, of course, like a lot of other people, I discovered this whole other world, and the kind of like blissed out feeling, which we call it. That's the kind of woo woo term for what we call like the meditative space. Um, But yeah, I discovered that, and that was like my hook, you know.
Hmm.
I also was like wrestling, leaving my faith. I'm an ex-Mormon.
Mm.
And so I was brought up in that faith. I had been wrestling with it and had just left as I was having my kids. So there was a huge identity shift happening for me at the time. And it really changed my life, you know, not to sound super dramatic, but yeah, I would say that I attribute a lot to yoga in that way.
Hmm. So when you let's go back to one of the first things you said about I think you said get back to my body or get into my body. Tell us a little more about that, what you were thinking at that point, because that's not something that most people on the street normally say.
I mean, it's everything in hindsight is 2020, and so I'll share a little bit. I don't think that it was a conscious thing at that point. I was just
Mm,
really looking to kind of um yeah, become stronger, become more elastic. It really was about just like wanting to be healthier and wanting to start a new habit, and this was something that I was doing with my sister.
mhm,
In hindsight, you know, I think that at least I'll speak to my experience growing up here in the States in Western culture, and also having been an ex-Mormon, there's such a like an emphasis on grind culture, hustle culture, transcending the body or whatever. There's a lot of that.
mhm,
And so in hindsight, I think that me intuitively going in that direction was kind of wanting to like do something different.
okay.
Um, Connecting with my body was at the time I didn't realize it, but it was such a portal. It was a portal to me understanding myself in a way I'd never understood myself. It was the place where I now understand like all of the magical things to happen, you know, in my Mormon upbringing. It's very much kind of placed in that this idea that the body is a bad thing and that we should be trying to surpass it in order to access God. And then when I started to get into my body, when I started to learn how my body was talking to me, I understood that that was the place where all of the magic happens. That's where I met God. And that's what I always said about childbirth. I always said, when I had my kid, my first baby, that's when I felt closest to God. And what I mean, I said that then, but what I think I meant was I felt closest to a God at that point.
Mm,
Um, I don't think that I understood it like I understand it now, but I think I had fragments of it then and made sense of it as I've journeyed further
yeah,
into yoga.
yeah, it's always interesting on our faith walks. I know this is true for me, and I think it's true for most, that you obviously you learn and grow and become aware of new things. But then when you look back, you can see different things that happened along the way that
Mhm.
played a part in who you are now, but not at the time, you weren't really even aware that that was going to be a big deal down the road.
Yeah, I had no clue. I didn't start yoga thinking that I was going to be in this place. And so that's why I say, you know, I wouldn't be where I am if it wasn't that I found yoga at that time.
Yeah, yeah. So you weren't going into yoga from a spiritual perspective at all.
No, I think that I was in a place of searching, even if I really didn't know it at the time. Um, I knew that there was a lot of searching from a place of like, how do I understand myself now that I've had a kid, which is a huge identity shift in and of itself. But I
Yes.
was also like freshly leaving my religion. I don't think that I even really was like, I'm gonna go on a walkabout. You know, I don't think that that's what I
Mhm.
was doing at all. I think I was just wandering,
Yeah. Yeah.
feeling around in the dark.
Right. So obviously you were raised with in Mormon church, but you were becoming an adult also was playing a part in this
Mhm.
journey.
Mhm.
What
Exactly.
what was it about and I know this isn't what we want to dwell on today, but I'm just curious what was causing you to step away?
That's a good question. I think that as I was growing up. So a little context is that my dad is Mexican, Mexican way, way, way back in my ancestry. And so that's a culture that is very steeped in, the colonial aspect of Spain being in Mexico has a huge amount to do with like the meshing of Catholicism, but also the mysticism and the magic that Mexico still is that way.
Mhm.
Catholicism and mysticism hold hands even still. And so
Mhm.
there is that in my context. But I think that one of the big, we call it the breaking of the shelf. We ex-Mormons call it
Mm.
when you're wrestling with something in the church, they tell you to put it on a shelf for later so that you can deal with it another time. And then when we start to wrestle with our faith, we call it the breaking of the shelf.
Okay.
But for me, what that looked like initially was, uh, it was in the kind of late 90s, early 2000s that people really started to talk about queerness and homosexuality and gay marriage and yeah, it was a lot then and I had a lot of gay friends. My first and best friends were often somewhere in the spectrum, whether they were gay or trans or whatever. I sensed a lot of that kind of well, we love them, but we don't like talk to them. Like we don't like form friendships with them. And so there was this separateness and a dissonance that I felt in like what we were saying versus what we were doing. And
Okay.
I think I've always really struggled with when I sense that there is that dissonance, I can sense that something is out of integrity and it makes me hugely uncomfortable.
Right.
Um, so that's when I really started to sense, especially as I was entering into high school. I remember one of my friends, we were coming back and he had just been confronted about his homosexuality, his parents. And we came back on the bus one day to see all of his things were out on the lawn.
Mm.
And we were, I think, maybe 14. Um, and all of the things were out on his lawn. And so what ended up happening was he was taken in by my best friend at the time. He lived with them for, I don't know, a year-ish. Before he started to reconcile with his parents, and thankfully he did. He was able to reconcile with his parents, but that was one of the earliest memories I had of like, oh, these things are very much at odds with each other, even though that's not what they're saying. They're saying, we're all God's children and so on and so forth. But that's when my shelf
Yeah.
started to break, so to
Right.
speak.
No, that makes sense. But you went into yoga without the intent that that would be a substitute in some form or fashion for your religious upbringing.
Yeah, yeah, I was very much not really interested in that. I had always had like a fascination with Eastern religions and philosophies. I was reading a lot about Taoism and Hinduism as a teenager. Um but I also was reading a lot about like anti-war movements at the time. I was going to rallies after 9/11, things like that. And so that was
Mhm.
also there and a lot of like 70s history and stuff like that. I was working at a job where someone who I was working with, an older woman who was at Berkeley at the time in the late 60s. And so she and I would talk all the time. She would share her experiences with me all the time. All of that was relevant in my
Yes.
brain. So I don't think that I connected it necessarily to yoga. It
Right.
just happened to be there.
Yeah. Well, tell us a little more about that journey into yoga and how that's affected you.
So, I went to it was just like a little brand new studio, and the gal's name who owned it was Brittany, and Brittany at the time was really trying to do something her own. She had come up in a studio that was a more traditional studio, and was trying to kind of do something a little bit more accessible because she was wanting to start her business in this college town, which was exactly where I was at. And so being able to get to know her and the group of people that were also happening to leave the church at the time was kind of a home of community people that I didn't really know that's what was forming.
Mm.
But that's what it was we were able to kind of wrestle with these ideas in real time. We were able to break the rules, which was hugely important for me at the time, was not just to have some kind of framework of accountability, but to have a place where I could safely wrestle, have a place where I could be having permission to act as felt, right for my body at any given moment was a radical idea.
Mhm.
Um, and gave me a voice where I felt I didn't even realize that I needed that at the time, but I did. I really needed that. That was really important for me. And then getting to understand smaller fragments of like this Eastern philosophy and how it played in these concepts of non-attachment, these concepts of non-violence, of restraint, of the fire that like purifies, which that's a concept that's in Christianity as well, right? That the
Right.
refiner's fire and that sort of thing. But having it be reframed and folded into all of these other concepts, self-study, truth seeking, and truth speaking, those are all concepts in yoga that have hugely informed me as I am today.
Yeah.
Um, and so all of that began with the Hindu mythology, that all began with yogic, I guess, scripture, for lack of a better word, texts.
Mhm.
But yeah, it
Okay.
started from there.
Did you at the time, and I'm wondering, do you even now feel a sense of, well, of, man, I just replaced the church for a yoga studio.
Yeah. It's something that I joke about all the time because, it's kind of this like canon event where you break away from this framework, which we are egoic beings, we're humans.
Right.
And because we don't know what's available, we tend to just kind of regurgitate old frameworks and we just like reformat them. So I joke that often it's just like one pair of white sacred garb for another pair of white sacred garb. Like
Mm.
we have the Mormon garments, which are like the sacred underwear that are a rite of passage. And then you go to India and then you wear your white harem pants and you put the white paint on your face and you have your hair up on a knot. Like it's just the same but reformatted. And so I joke about that often.
Hmm.
But the fact is that it's not, like exclusive. They aren't mutually exclusive. It's a thing that happens
Yes.
globally. This idea of like wanting to be nearer to the divine. And so we wear things that are free of stains. It's not about the whiteness, although that is definitely a conversation, is like how constructs of whiteness kind of creep their way in again,
Yes.
because we're egoic beings.
Right.
Um, but there's truth. This is like a global phenomenon, is that we're wanting to try and get closer to the divine in various ways, and part of that is through sympathetic, what I call sympathetic magic. So for example, wanting to be closer to the energy of the moon, and so we look for these kind of like lunar aspects, and so we get closer to it with these silvery or nighttime looking things, and we start to wear that and present that way. We do that, humans.
Yes.
Um, and so it is a joke, and I like to poke fun at that. I think that we can do a lot with humor and speaking truth to power with humor. I think comedians
Yes.
do that a lot.
Yeah.
So I try to bring that a little bit into my own classes because I think that we can deflate a little bit of the pressure that we put on ourselves with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the the other thing that you said that made me even think of that is you talked about how in this studio that you started going to, it that became your community,
Yeah,
which in a
absolutely.
way is what the church is too. It's your community
Yeah,
where you're
that's
all seeking something, and now you're in a different community where you're
mhm,
together seeking thing, but you expressed, that, there was a difference between the
mhm.
2.
Yeah.
And a big difference is how the body is viewed. Can you speak a little more about that, what you've learned, how your perspective of the body has changed over time?
Yeah. So I'll address a couple of things, which are the Mormon perspective, there's the yogic perspective, and then there's my perspective as a person who's practicing this and has my own beliefs. But the Mormon perspective is that the body is a carnal thing that is given to us by God, but it is a tool given to us by God so that we can use it to transcend and kind of access the divine in spite of it, let's say. So it's a gift, but it's kind of like this gift given to us so that we can like overcome it. Yoga is kind of this thing because Hinduism has a lot of like reincarnation concepts in that. So what they try to say is that the body is a tool as well, and it's something that we can learn from. We are not the body. Um, but we can process a lot through this body. So yoga will posit that we are a fragment of the all of source, not too different from what like Christianity will teach is that we
Mhm.
are, a fragment of God or that we are God's children. And so when you individuate from source and you have this body, it is kind of just like a temporary shell. And so you can learn a lot from the data that you receive from this body, but you are not to take it as personal identity because then that's where harm comes, that's where suffering comes, is when you begin to identify with the things. If you identify with the body and what you're able to do with the body, eventually you will become, you'll get pain from that because the body changes. And so if
Mhm.
you identify with your ability and that changes, then you are no longer like, who are you?
Yes.
You start to suffer because now you've lost your sense of self. Or if you identify with your role and that changes, say I'm a mother and then I lose my child, now who am I? So all of this suffering can come if you take on too much of your identity. Yoga will tell you that you can learn a lot from the body, but it is a temporary thing. So not to attach yourself too much. Um, and then my own belief is kind of somewhere in the middle of that, is that we can meet the divine through all of these processes. These are all chemical processes that are happening through and because of the body. And so there is no transcending the body. This is to take the divine wisdom that is given to you, that you glean from all of this data that you're harvesting, and to make sense of it and to integrate it rather than try to be rid of the body. We will be rid of the body at some point. You know, the body is always changing, as Octavia Butler says, right? God is change.
Yeah.
Um, but and so to be as present as possible with what is happening now, and to know that the divine is happening to me constantly. I can always access the divine. And I have various ways to do that, whether that's through trance state in my body or whether that's through trance state meditating and somewhere outside of my body.
Mhm.
All of those are access points that are available to me and everyone.
Yeah. So, as I grew up as a kid, I was taught or heard, I should say, that, ooh, yoga could be some weird, you become your own god kind of thing. That doesn't sound like what you're saying. Is that correct?
So that's there too. And that's actually a concept that's also in Mormonism, which was a really interesting conversation, interesting piece. It's not so discussed now because Mormonism is trying to kind of distance itself from that esoteric belief. But that was there when I was growing up. You can become a god of your own world. And yoga will say that there are as many gods as there are people, and that because we are all chasing after that, we can become as God,
Mm.
that we are all the divine. So,
And
yes
that
and
is
no.
possible in this lifetime, not just after death, that's
Correct.
possible, right? Which
Yeah.
I assume what some would call enlightenment or, is that correct?
Yeah, the concept would be this is something that we can get through that meditative space. It's called the concept of self-remembrance, which is when we are able to kind of sift through all of this egoic thought and remember that we are connected to the divine at all times, is that, oh, we were never separate. Like this
Mhm.
was never a thing, which I think that the Western mind, the colonized mind, the Christian mind loves to kind of say, like, no, you can't do that because then you won't need anything else. Then
Yeah.
you are not autonomous. Then you can't be like controlled, you know? Um, and So, and that's also something that I think that for me as a culture, yoga culture, I try to be careful of because one hive mind is, you know, it's not too different than another hive mind. It's just a reformatted version of the same thing. So trying to find the truth in the hive mind can be a tricky thing, but it can also be a really beautiful and comforting thing to find community. Um, but it is to find like, the truth that's always living here. And I'm
Mhm.
tapping on my chest for those who are listening. I'm tapping on my chest because that's where you find truth a lot.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a scary thought for some of us who've been raised in a more fundamentalist, uh, perspective that
Hmm.
w we can't trust ourselves. It's kind of the
Yeah,
thought.
it's tricky, as
Yeah,
a person now who, I would say I'm pretty mystical. I know how
yeah,
I sound. Um, but yeah, that it takes practice to understand what what truth sounds like when it's not attached to urgency or someone else's agenda or what you think you should do. Um,
yeah.
yeah.
And I think there's a big litmus test or maybe more than one litmus test for us as we uh, walk along. One of those is how is it perceived by the people around us? People
Hmm.
generally understand truth when they hear truth and yeah, I was just happened to be look at a passage of Jesus this morning where the people as he was teaching said, "Well, how in the world are you saying all these true things and you haven't even been to college? Where did this come from?" And I was reminded of that mystical ability that as we remove our own egos from self, we are getting closer to the truth and can speak the
Hmm.
truth and others recognize. I think another way that for me in my own walk, and I'd be curious to get your perspective on this from a yoga perspective is the understanding that God is love. If anything leads away from love, we red flags should go up.
Hmm.
Something's out of kilter here. And
Yeah.
I believe that is truth. I may have a lot of things wrong with my theology or concepts or who I
Hmm.
am, a lot of things. But I can definitely know that love is a better state than hate, that they are
Hmm.
opposite and things that lead to love are good and things that lead away from love are bad.
Mm.
What does yoga have to say about that? Does that fit in any way?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that there are certain archetypes, and like I say, yogic texts will often say there are as many gods as there are people. So if your god is money, or if your money or your god is power, there's a god for that. There's a representation, there's an archetype for
Mhm.
that. We see that in the biblical golden calf.
Yeah, that's not
And
anything unusual for Christianity.
absolutely not. So my question, I suppose, is like, what is one person's God? Um, and there are certain archetypes within Hinduism that would say that hatred is just as much a part of love as not. So, for instance, if you love this world, then how can you not hate the things that are trying to destroy it? Hate it or anger or rage are protective emotions,
Mm,
and protection is rooted in love. And so I would say that maybe it's just a reframe. I'm not saying that hatred is the answer or that anger is the answer, but I'm asking, what is anger pointing you to?
yes.
Um, what is the hatred pointing you to? Is it because of the anger at the way that people wield power unfairly? Or perhaps it's a manipulation or something, and your animal body is signaling to you that you're being used for something that is not in integrity to
Yes.
you or to how you live your life. And so I think all of that can be still attributed to love, but it is something that I think that we need to ask ourselves really deeply. And that is something that I think yoga has the power to teach us if we can be there long enough to withstand. That's a form of that fire that is refining.
Mhm.
Um, and so, yes, I think that you're right. And I think that love is the glue that holds the cosmos together. But I think that explosions are also a form of creation. The goddess Kali is a reminder of that. She is the womb.
Mm.
And if you've ever been or witnessed a birth, you've seen how metal it can get.
Yeah.
And so I think that it is not to dissolve that love or that fear or that grief. It is just to ask it what it's pointing to.
Yeah. Yeah. So, would it be fair to say that yoga is a good form, structure, I don't know what word to use, to connect you to the body, which then can help you connect to the divine? Is that accurate, or correct
I
that
would say
as you see
so.
it?
I would say so. I often make this comparison in my classes, which is that the body is like a train that I'm on. If I'm on the train, it's very hard for me to sense the motion, the speed with which I'm going, right? Or if you're in a moving
Mhm.
car, for instance, I
Mhm.
can't sense that I'm going 60 miles an hour. The only thing that can sense that is that if I'm outside of it, right? If
Mhm.
I'm witnessing myself. And so that's what yoga gives us the framework to do, is to observe the train that we're on.
Okay.
Um, and if that train is to stop or to meet resistance, and we notice that resistance, that's when we get to actually practice the yoga. Um, that's when we get to practice detachment and radical compassion, um, because of the inertia of this body that we're in and the mechanisms that are in place. Like, we have evolved for millions of years to get to this point. We have no idea the chemical processes that are happening without our awareness. So now it's just for us to kind of look back with through the lens of yoga to understand ourselves better. And if we can understand ourselves better through this body and understand that we are always with the divine, and then that means that we can look at the collective through that lens as well and go, they are also the divine.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah,
hence the, name of this podcast, "The Light in All," which is a
exactly.
concept that's been really important in my journey. Um, I wanna ask you kind of a probably gonna sound like a dumb question, but hopefully it makes some sense to you. When you say the portal of yoga, how does that relate to what I think of with yoga as being a bunch of different movements of the body?
Mm. Yeah, so it'll be kind of a long question, but because yoga as we know it today really developed in the beginning of I would say, like, the latter half of the 19th century, early 20th century. It
Okay.
started to kind of cross paths with modern gymnastics and globalization and um
So it
starting
hasn't
to
always been that what I just
no.
described as what a yoga studio if I walked in and just took a class.
Correct. That really came about through, I'm going to keep it brief and just say, like, there are lineages that kind of began to branch off. There are as many different kinds of yoga as there are practitioners. And so modern yoga as we know it, or when we say the word yoga and you get this image in your mind of people stretching in a class, really only evolved in the last, like, 100 years or so. Um, there are postural things that you can find in the ancient yogic texts, but those were like serious practitioners, people who entered into a lineage who underwent, like, they're under a mentor, or a guru in this case, and they're receiving specific wisdom and, like, very much putting their spiritual journey in the hands of somebody else, a teacher who can hold them accountable. Anyway, I'm sorry, what was the question? I'm getting away from
I'm
myself
trying to
here.
find the connection to yoga as a portal through the into the body to
Huh.
learn about the divine with going and doing different poses. What's the
Got it.
connection?
The connection is, thank you. Thank you for reminding
That's
me.
right.
There's a couple of different myths that come to mind. And so, one of the archetypes that you often hear about in yoga is the Lord Ganesh, who is the elephant headed god. He is the remover of obstacles, but he's also the creator of obstacles. So, he would be kind of putting things in your path for your growth, but then you could also lean on him for that growth. And so, one form is to do like various mantras, which are chanting to enter into trance state. But there are also various poses and things like that. One that I can think of is Lord Hanuman. Um, and the pose name is Hanumanasana, which is splits. The mythology of Hanuman is that he takes a great leap across so that he can save Sita. Anyway, so the without getting really far into the mythology, but there are poses like Natarajasana, who is the another myth and things like that. So, um, an archer or a split or half Lord of the Fishes is Matsyendrasana. Matsyen is the root word for the Lord of the Fish. Um, but anyway, so there are like
Yeah.
mythological things being tied into yoga, postural yoga, and that's kind of where we get a lot of that.
Yeah. How did the 2 get attached to each other so much? I'm just trying to make some sense of it. Yeah.
I think it's because of kind of one form, and like I say, you have to be kind of careful because it wasn't always this way.
Mhm.
But you could argue that like doing a chin stand has nothing to do with spirituality, and I agree. It's just one mechanism with which we get to practice spirituality. But there I think that it's partially what we're trying to do is to get closer to the divine by practicing this kind of sympathetic form of magic. We
Mm,
become the archetype by embodying the archetype.
'kay. And I know we're gonna be running short on time here, and we'll wanna wrap it up. But I'm curious, I know that some of our listeners are wrestling with, "Wait, now I'm a Christian, can't now I'm worried I can't do yoga." I
Mhm.
thought it was n they weren't opposed to each other. What do you
Yeah.
have to say about that?
Ooh. At the risk of being extremely cliche right now, but it's true. I think there are a lot of truths and cliches as well, but
Mhm.
it's one truth, many songs. Um, I think that we all are trying to find our way there, and there are various paths because we're various people, and we need to find, for instance, I grew up in Utah. Like the prevalent
Mhm.
culture is Mormonism,
Right.
um, and I never, if you had asked me at that young age whether I ever saw myself being here, I would have been like, no,
Mm.
no, like that's not how I see myself. That's not the life that I was brought up to do. And so I arrived here. And in hindsight, it all makes sense. I know that I was following this path and I had all of these fragments and it hadn't landed for me yet. And so, what I would say to those people is just keep going, keep seeking truth, keep seeking after God, whichever form of God you feel is appropriate for you, because it will change. At the time that I left Mormonism, my God looked like a certain thing. And I always said at that point, I have no idea what I'm going to want in 5 years or 10 years or
Mhm.
20 years. Allowing yourself the space and fluidity to trust that the divine is always there with you, which that.
Yeah.
You know that you're not floating around in this cosmos willy-nilly for nothing. If you feel that, then that's not going to change. Perhaps your lens will, but if God is all of the multitudes that we say they are, that he is, or whatever your God looks like,
Right.
then trust that you'll find them there and they'll find you.
I can't think of a better way than to end with that statement.
It takes a lot of trust, but that's what we call it, or faith if you want to use
Yes.
that verbiage. And if you have that, I trust that you keep going, right?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Angie. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you, and thank you so much for sharing your heart with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. This was a joy. Thank you.